Welcome to the OK Let's Learn podcast. This is two podcasts in one. One where we dive into tons of interesting stories and books, and another where we just dive into tons of interesting topics. My name is Kevin O'Keefe. So today, let's learn all about the story of the Statue of Liberty. Yes, this is a shout out. I was in a rut, didn't know what our next episode would be, and a shout out to Derek C. Rupert, my fantasy basketball friend. He came up with the idea, but he got the idea from Maz, the mathematician, who saw a post on Instagram that was a side-by-side of the Statue of Liberty right next to Jalen Brunson. And yes, you can timestamp this episode. All my episodes are evergreen, but just so you know, this one came out on the morning of June 14th, 2026. Jalen Brunson is the king of New York. It's going to be a long time because he brought us to the promised land, an NBA championship for the first time since 1973. And it's apropos because he has liberated us New Yorkers from the despair and the hopelessness of year after year of never winning the championship. So we are the champions, and I'm not going to go into the Queen song. Just picture the United States. If you think of the United States, and especially from my friends outside of this country, what images do you think of? Well, certainly the American flag, maybe the White House, possibly Uncle Sam, but no. So many people think at the very top of the list is the Statue of Liberty. She is instantly recognizable around the world, and most people really, I think, only know one fact about this amazing statue, that it was a gift from France. But that simple sentence barely scratches the surface. The story of the Statue of Liberty is a story about revolution, friendship, immigration, engineering, politics, but ultimately at the end of the day, freedom and liberty. And it all started in this revolution they call the American Revolution back in 1776. We wouldn't be a country today without the help of the country of France. We declared our independence from Great Britain. 13 American colonies. It was bold, but the colonies faced one huge problem. They were fighting against the most powerful empire on earth. They desperately needed help. They needed an ally. They needed a friend. And one nation saw an opportunity. France. Why? Because, hey, it wasn't just about kindness and just, hey, I'm going to help out a country in need or a country that wanted to be a country. France and Britain had been at their throats for years. Only a decade earlier, France had suffered a humiliating defeat in the French and Indian War, and it lost most of its North American territory to the British, right? So helping the Americans was both a strategic decision, and for many in France, it was something that they were lacking, something that they aspired to. There was this time period called the Enlightenment. And in France, those ideas of liberty, representative government, and individual rights meant something. There was this undercurrent, kind of like longing, like I said, for something that was different. And it was bubbling under the surface. France at this time had a king. It was Louis XVI. And along with him, there was this young gentleman, this French aristocrat named Marquis de Lafayette. He was barely 20 years old. He sailed to America and volunteered to fight alongside George Washington. The two men became close friends, and Lafayette became a hero to the revolution. Why? Because he went to the King of France and advocated for the cause. The French military aid was decisive. Their money, their weapons, their troops, and especially the French Navy, which, remember, the colonies had zero power on the water. They helped trap the British forces at the Siege of Yorktown in 1781. That victory ended the war, and it secured this new country's independence. The friendship was born during the Revolution, and it certainly continued through the years, although talk about history, and we just have to digress here for a moment. With King Louis XVI, in 1789, only 6 years after we won against the British, the French had their own revolution, but it was so different than ours. In fact, it was looking for liberty. It was looking for a change in the government without a king, but it descended into chaos. The monarchy was overthrown. Queen Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI were killed. During this infamous reign of terror, thousands of people were sent to the guillotine. Yes, it's horrible. The revolution eventually gave way to military rule under a brilliant but ambitious general by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte. You may have heard of him. His empire dominated Europe. Finally, it collapsed in 1815. For the next half century, France struggled to find any kind of stability. It swung back and forth between kings and republics and even another empire under Napoleon's nephew, Napoleon III. Only after the collapse of the Second Empire in 1870 and the establishment of what they called the French Third Republic did a durable democratic government start to emerge, and just like the United States. So here we are in the 1860s, and there was this dinner party. Yeah, it was a little party, a get-together outside Paris. It was shortly after 1865 and the American Civil War had ended. Who hosted this dinner party? Well, his name was Edouard de La Boulaye. Yeah, say that again. Edouard de La Boulaye. He happened to bring up in a conversation, you know what? United States, it's amazing. Just abolished slavery. The Union won. Here we have democracy winning the day. We should create a monument honoring not only what America has done, but to honor our friendship between these two great countries, us and the United States of America. Well, that conversation changed the skyline of the New York harbor forever. One of the guests that just happened to be listening to this conversation was Frederic Auguste Bartholdi. Yes, Frederic Bartholdi. These are the two men responsible for us having this enormous symbol of our liberty. We got to start and back up a second. You got to know about these two people. La Boulaye, well, he was famous in France, and he wasn't famous because he was a politician, a soldier, or an artist. He was just very basically a respected scholar. He was an historian. He was a professor. And he was a writer. He spent most of his career studying the United States and was fascinated by the American Constitution. So with the back and forth between monarchies and republics in France, La Boulaye just basically saw that, yeah, like I said, America was proof that this democracy, this idea that democracy and a government could go together and survive and prosper, it was doable. So this idea had been percolating in his head for years, just creating some kind of lasting symbol between the friendship of our two great countries. So Bartholdi is this young sculptor, and he was definitely an admirer of La Boulaye. From an early age, he definitely showed artistic talent, and he got interested and became a sculptor, and he thought big. Really. He ended up traveling throughout Europe and the Middle East, and he became obsessed and really admired all of these huge statues throughout ancient Egypt and certainly the pyramids. And he was thinking, no, not just to have a little sculptor in a park here or there. He was thinking big. So Labude at this dinner party brings up, isn't this amazing what the United States has done? We should have something that we can create that's a symbol of our friendship. And Bartholdi, he had something in his back pocket. You see, he had proposed this colossal lighthouse at the entrance to the Suez Canal, and this design that he had come up with featured, okay, listen to this, a gigantic robed woman holding a lantern high above her head. It was intended to symbolize progress and enlightenment guiding ships into the canal, but the Egyptian government, they thought it was fine. It was a good idea, but it was just too expensive, so it died. And of course, Bartholdi never forgot it. He wanted to create something. So after the conversation, he pulls out his old sketches. Yeah, the giant woman remained, but the lantern, it evolved into the torch. And instead of welcoming ships to Egypt, she would welcome ships to America. I mean, the original idea that Bartholdi had come up with was Libertas, the ancient Roman goddess of freedom. So now it's 1871, and this became Bartholdi's project. He didn't come up with the idea, but now that he had his idea for this grand, big statue come into view, he was going to roll with it. He traveled to the United States, 1871. He met political leaders. He toured American cities. He searched for the perfect location, but he found the location as soon as he entered the New York harbor. There was this small island called Bedloe's Island. It sat directly in the path of every ship coming into New York, all these immigrants that are arriving here in the country. And of course, it was perfect. This is where the statue belonged. So now it's March 3rd, 1877. Ulysses S. Grant, our president, approved Bedloe's Island as the home of this future Statue of Liberty. Yeah, that's what they called it. But here's the thing. There was one problem. There was no statue. There was no pedestal that existed. And no one had enough money to build either one. From the beginning, the project had been structured as a partnership, right? It was a gift. We just basically approved that, yeah, fine. That's nice of you. You want to give us something? We'll take it, right? But the French would pay and construct the statue. That was the understanding. And the Americans, well, they would pay for the pedestal on which the statue would stand. This was no easy task. It was not going to be cheap, right? Sounds simple, but it was anything but. The fundraising in France began immediately. School children donated coins, groups organized events, businesses contributed money, and there was even a national lottery that helped to raise funds. The project became a source of pride for a lot of French citizens who viewed it as a symbol of liberty and friendship between us and France. I mean, you think about it today, with all the nationalistic interest of every country, it's amazing that we pulled it off at this time period. Talk about a great bond between two countries. And certainly that would continue, thankfully, to today. So the money slowly starts coming in and they begin working on the statue. The man responsible for bringing Bartholdi's vision to life wasn't another sculptor, but an engineer. Yeah, his name was Gustave Eiffel. You may have heard of him. He was a brilliant young engineer who would become, of course, famous for building the Eiffel Tower. The challenge that Eiffel was facing was unlike anything anyone had attempted before. How do you build a statue taller than a 15-story building and ensure they could survive decades, right, of winds, storms, winters, summers. His idea was amazing. He didn't create a solid monument. He designed an internal iron skeleton. The statue's outer skin would be attached to this framework, allowing the copper, now yes, it would be a copper exterior, to move slightly when it was exposed to the strong winds and all the temperature changes. Even today, engineers marvel at how advanced this design was for its time. So workers started creating the statue piece by piece. I mentioned the outer surface was copper sheets. The copper was actually really thin, only about as thick as like 2 pennies stacked together. They actually hammered the copper from the reverse side until it took like this desired shape. Remember, this is a sculpture, right? Not just a building. So this giant woman began to emerge, like I said, piece by piece. The first section was the robe, then the arms, then the head, then the torch. Visitors could actually watch portions of the statue being assembled in Paris. I mean, they talk about a public relations kind of get out there and give us some more money, help this being a reality, and setting the scene for everyone just to look forward to this being a reality. They ended up sending the torch to this Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, which was celebrating 100 years of our country, 1876. And Americans would pay money to climb into the torch. And of course, again, it helped support the construction. We ended up helping pay for the last $250,000 that we were short to make it a reality. So we did. Average Americans threw in pennies, threw in dollars to support the cause to build this, right? They actually also had the completed head was exhibited at the Paris World Fair. So here we are now. It's 1884, and it was almost done in France. It stood more than 151 feet tall from the heel all the way to the top of the head. And listen to this, it weighed 225 tons. So now that it's finished, the problem is, how do you get it to America? How do you get it across the ocean? How do you transport a 225-ton statue? Well, pretty simple answer. You take it apart. And that's what they did. In 1885, they broke it up into hundreds of pieces. The sections were packed into 214 crates and loaded aboard a French naval transport ship called the Isère. Talk about a big event, right? But now that it's here, it still needed to be put back together. Massive cranes lifted the sections into plates. Iron supports were connected. Copper panels were attached. Slowly, Lady Liberty rose above the harbor. Finally, on October 28th, 1886, it was done. Thousands of spectators packed New York City for the dedicated ceremony. President Grover Cleveland accepted the statue on behalf of the American people. And talk about coming full circle with this episode. The Knicks are given a ticker tape parade. Well, what happened? Once Lady Liberty was official, there was a parade that was marching through Lower Manhattan, and office workers were tossing out ticker tape from the windows. And historians actually point to this celebration as being the birth of, yes, the Canyon of Heroes, New York City's famous ticker tape parade tradition. Now let's talk about the statue itself. Now that it's here, a lot of people know this, but in case you don't, initially she wasn't green. She was made of copper, so she looked like a brand new penny. As copper reacts with oxygen and all the wear and tear, the moisture in the salty sea air, it turns to green. And initially, people really wanted to turn it back. As it started turning green, they wanted to repaint it so it was go back to being brown. But what scientists realized was the green coating was actually protecting the copper underneath it. Without that layer, the statue would have deteriorated a lot quicker. As the years passed, the meaning of the monument evolved. When Ellis Island opened in 1892. It's important to understand. We think of it, well, Ellis Island, it was just there, right, prior to the Statue of Liberty. No, it wasn't. Millions of immigrants, when they arrived to New York City from this point on in 1892, saw this beacon of freedom. Now, the torch, right? Listen to this. So many things about this statue we take for granted and we don't think about. The torch symbolizes enlightenment, the idea that freedom lights the path forward. Those 7 projections that extend from the crown, most people assume that top of Lady Liberty's head is just like a queen's crown with the spikes. No, that's not what Bartholdi intended. Those spikes are actually rays of light. Many interpret them as actually representing like the 7 continents, the 7 seas. And of course, right, it not only is us with liberty, but liberty projecting around the world. In her left hand, she carries a tablet rather than a weapon. Inscribed on the tablet in Roman numerals is July 4th, 1776, of course, the date of the Declaration of Independence. Her feet, most people don't know this because it's so high up on the pedestal and you can't see it, they're shackles. Hidden beneath her robes at her feet are broken chains and shackles. They symbolize freedom, right? With the Civil War ending and slavery being abolished. Talk about symbolism. It's right there. And how about her face? This is something that is controversial and it's really, nobody really is 100% sure. A lot of historians actually believe that Bartholdi used his mother, Charlotte, as the inspiration for her face, right? She's got this calm expression, but clearly you can see she's projecting strength and dignity, wisdom, right? And the ideas of liberty. And a few final things to wrap up our podcast to talk about the Statue of Liberty. One that a lot of you may be thinking of, 1903, a bronze plaque was added to the pedestal that was all about Emma Lazarus' poem, The New Colossus, and the final lines, really some of the most famous words ever associated with the United States, and really not just these words, but the sight of Lady Liberty with immigrants coming to our country and risking everything, leaving their homelands and hoping and praying for a new way of life, a new chance, a second chance at life, really would bring people to tears. Not only seeing it, but hearing these words. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Now, by the time the early 80s came along, it wasn't falling apart, but there were major problems, structural problems with the whole statue, especially the torch. So Lee Iacocca's famous CEO of Chrysler ended up being appointed by Ronald Reagan, our president. And yeah, they did a big fundraising effort, contributed money, all private money, to fixing the torch, right? They repaired the iron framework, the insides, and they strengthened so many of the supports. And then, of course, as we all know, September 11th, 2001 came along, and it affected the Statue of Liberty in terms of its security, its access to the inside of the statue actually remained closed for years while people upgraded the security system, the evacuation procedures. It reopened in 2004, but access to the crown didn't resume until 2009. Even today, if you're going to visit the Crown, it requires a special reservation because only a limited number of people can safely climb the narrow staircases each day. There's 354 steps from the base to the Crown. We didn't talk about this, right? I mean, for years, visitors could actually climb into the torch from 1886 until 1916. Like I said, you could look out into the New York Harbor. Imagine that sitting up there in that torch. Well, that changed after a massive explosion that was known as the Black Tom explosion. It happened in 1916. German agents sabotaged a munitions depot in New Jersey during World War I that damaged the statue. The torch was closed to the public afterward and was never reopened. Now, a few more final interesting points here. It sways. Windy days, it can move several inches, and the torch can move by as much as 5 inches. Lightning strikes hit the statue regularly. Because it towers obviously above the harbor, it's struck by lightning several hundred times a year. The Crown windows, there's 25 of them, 25 small windows that overlook the harbor, 25 different spots that people can look out, right? How about this? The shoe size, you're not going to find it in a shoe store. It's a 879 size shoe. Her feet are 25 feet long. Her index finger is about 8 feet long. Her nose is 5 feet long. The waistline of the statue measures about 35 feet. Her face is more than 8 feet tall. If Lady Liberty were a real person, she could stand taller than most 4-story buildings. As I referenced earlier, her 7 rays weigh approximately 150 pounds each. During World War II, she was open every single day. Initially, early on, right up until 1902, believe it or not, her torch was functional. It was actually a lighthouse aid for ships coming into the harbor. But the lighting system, it didn't work very well. It was beautiful, the torch, but it wasn't bright enough to be an effective lighthouse, which is one reason why this whole lighthouse role ended. I mean, New York City wasn't always a slam dunk. They considered Boston, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, believe it or not. And how about this? The official name is not the Statue of Liberty. Everyone runs with that because it's really more of its nickname. The actual name of the statue is Liberty Enlightening the World. Talk about a true-false question, a multiple-choice question, a trivia question, a gotcha question. And finally, who owns this island? Who owns Lady Liberty? Well, everyone in the United States owns the actual statue, but the land that it's sitting on, does it belong to New Jersey or New York? The land is legally owned by the state of New York. That's because in 1834, there was this agreement that granted New York the permanent jurisdiction over the island, even though it sits entirely inside New Jersey's surrounding waters. The boundary goes straight through the middle of the Hudson River and is located on the Jersey side. This got so crazy and so convoluted that it went ultimately onto the Supreme Court in 1998, and it's still basically, there was some minutia that, some of the landfill that was added over the decades belongs to New Jersey, but basically it sits there as the agreement originally stood in 1834. Its jurisdiction is in New York. New York owns the land, even though it sits in New Jersey. Sorry, Jersey. Second-class citizens again. Bottom line, Jersey, New York, it belongs to all of us, the United States of America, and it was given to us by France, and 4 million people visit it every single year. Friends, thanks for taking this journey with me, learning all about the Statue of Liberty. Reach out to me at KEVMOK21@gmail.com. We are on Facebook. We are on YouTube. Hit that plus button in the top right-hand corner of Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to the podcast. You'll get the new episodes on your phone every time there's a new episode. Until next time, have fun and keep learning.